You make countless mistakes when you're playing. It can be hard to hear, but it's the truth. If you're platinum and below, you're probably making a game-losing mistake every single minute. And just because it doesn't get exploited every game doesn't mean you aren't messing up. The good news is that most of the game-losing common mistakes we see are easily fixable. You just need to know what to look out for. So in this guide, we'll be covering 4 of the most common top lane mistakes being made right now, why they're bad, and how to fix them. Let's jump right into it. Now, all the mistakes we're going to cover in this guide are pretty bad and can lose laning phases instantly. But this one is without a doubt the most common error that top laners commit almost every single game. To illustrate it, we'll take a look at this gold Darius playing versus a Tahm Kench. As a quick note about this matchup, this is probably about as free of a laning phase as it gets for any top laner. Darius destroys tanks, so it's almost impossible for Kench to win this lane 1v1. All Kench can possibly try to do is poke with Q, which Darius would have to be completely AFK for. As long as he plays in the wave, there's literally nothing Kench can do. Basically, Kench is just praying he gets jungle help at any point, as that is the only win condition. Let's watch what happens. In an unexpected turn of events, Darius is the one who establishes early control over the wave in this lane. Kench was way too afraid to try and contest him, so the poor frog just played back and resigned himself to losing this lane. Without covering every detail, all that happens on the first 3 waves is that Darius chunks Kench a little bit, and eventually he gets a big wave crash at the tower. Okay, now the following is what really matters, so pay attention. While the wave bounces back, Kench messes up and lets Darius get a really good trade-off. He tries to fight back a bit, but ultimately Darius is too much to handle. After this next Q, it's clear as day that Darius came out massively ahead in this trade. A little later on, Darius tries to go for another trade here. This one doesn't go as well, but we don't have time to discuss that. Master Yi is already here and kills the overextended Darius, and the lane is thrown. Now, you might think, okay, learn to play around junglers, cool. Nope, we don't care that Darius got ganked. If we go back, look at this frame. Doesn't Kench look completely fine here? If anything, he's winning this horrible matchup all on his own. How did things go so poorly after this great trade? And no, Kench being OP isn't the answer. The big mistake was that most top lane players don't give much thought to long-term lane states and often just tunnel vision on the trades in front of them. This can be especially important depending on the matchup. Let's put it like this. Imagine 2 different scenarios. In one, you're playing something like Aurelia versus Vladimir. You've got him pushed under tower at 40% HP while you're still at 80%. The second scenario is that you're both at full HP, but you got the wave closer to your side of the lane. Which scenario would you rather be in when playing Aurelia, and why? A 40% HP advantage is absolutely massive. However, there's nothing a champion like Aurelia can do to punish a Vladimir under his tower. The HP difference is completely irrelevant, so Vladimir is perfectly happy to keep farming. In the other scenario, Aurelia is a massive bully versus a weak laner like Vladimir. Even though he still has 100% HP, Aurelia has way more options to go in and fight him, making Vladimir's life miserable and pushing him off the wave. This is a really important concept to keep in mind, which many low elo top laners easily forget. Lane states can often determine who wins trades and all-ins. Going back to Darius's first big trade, you should always ask yourself before fighting, will this ruin my future lane state that I'm working towards? In this case, Darius is a champion that uses an AoE ability to trade. By fighting, Darius is pushing the wave back into Kench, which goes against what he wants out of the lane. As we mentioned in a ton of our guides, champions who run Conqueror or Lethal Tempo and stuff like Ghost generally want a lot of space in the lane to chase down their opponents. Now, thankfully, he got really lucky that the wave is still pushing into him, so the trade was technically good. We're saying he got lucky because that definitely wasn't planned. He makes the exact same mistake on the second trade. Even if he had won this fight, the wave would be pushing into Kench, which he'd be very happy about. Ultimately, the major lesson here is to always think about where you'd ideally want a wave to be in every single matchup that you're in. Top lane is a role about long-term wave management in a ton of matchups, so this is something you should constantly be thinking about the entire time as you're laning. And it's for this reason we highly recommend checking out our wave control course at skillcap.com. We cover everything you need to know to start stomping your lanes. You'll learn freezing, fast pushing, slow pushing, bouncing waves, the list goes on, all in just a few minutes to maximize your improvement rate. Or maybe you just like seeing your opponent's health go to 0, then you'll love our trading course. We even have a skill test at the end so you can see how good you really are. Players just like you are leaving 5-star reviews and raving at how helpful they are. The best part, our service is completely risk-free to try as you're kept safe with rank up insurance. If you don't significantly improve while actively using SkillCap, then you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Get the rank you've always wanted by clicking the link in the description below. Now, speaking of wave management, our second mistake is another big one, and it's the fact that many players don't commit to the strategies that they opted into. Top lane is by far the most punishing role if you don't win a 1v1. This means that the most common ways you'll be playing in tough matchups are either letting the wave push into you or taking control of it and using the bigger wave to be able to walk up versus a tough lane opponent. However, players very often don't stick to these concepts. They get afraid or impatient throwing the lane. Let's show you exactly what we mean. Here's a gold Aurelia versus a K'Sante. Now, this matchup is not particularly great for Aurelia on equal footing. She just straight up loses the 1v1 early on if she tries to fight fairly. What's nice at the start of this lane though is that Aurelia got to the wave first and started building a slow push. This is good and the default strategy for level 1 in almost any matchup. Build a slow push, crash, and reap the benefits. Now, if we pause here, Aurelia should immediately be aware of how ahead she is in the push. If she wants to keep her slow push going, she should walk up and stop K'Sante from trying to equalize the wave here. If he hits the minions, Aurelia gets free harass to build a health lead, or she can just continue hitting the wave. This way, she keeps her minion health advantage. And lastly, if he fights back, then he'll still be at a minion deficit, so Aurelia can keep leveraging her wave advantage. But she just watches as he clears the 3 melee minions, completely equalizing the lane. Now, let's be clear, this isn't the end of the world. Maybe she doesn't know how this matchup goes and is afraid that even with the minion lead that she would lose this trade. That's fine. You don't need perfect game knowledge to climb. If she thinks she needs to play passively, so be it. So if that's the case, then why did she walk up and auto attack the wave again? This is the massive mistake we see again and again in low elo. Just make up your mind. If your goal is to let the wave push into you, then you should hit it as little as you possibly can so that it pushes into you quickly. This way you can farm and preserve your health. But low elo players love randomly auto attacking the wave, which stalls the wave in the middle for even longer. This is what's allowing the enemy K'Sante to run rampant and put so much pressure in this lane. Look how even the wave continues to look and how it's stuck in the middle. It's all because Aurelia keeps randomly thinning it for no reason. Do you see how painful this laning phase looks? It's not a fun matchup, but it should not be this bad. Eventually, Aurelia gets fed up with how hard it is to farm and just straight up feeds a free kill. Yes, her mechanics here were pretty gross, but that is not why she's died so early into the lane. One of the most important concepts to managing waves in top lane is just confidence and consistency. If you're playing with a slow push, then have the confidence to guard it, even in bad matchups. Waves are very important early on, so don't just let your opponent equalize for free. Leverage the fact that you have more minions and confidently stand your ground. Or if you've committed to letting the wave push into you, then just be patient and actually let it come into you instead of consistently auto-attacking it for no reason. If you do so, the wave will quickly crash into you, and then you can just play for a bounce back slow push as we discuss in a bunch of our other guides. On to our third mistake. This is a quick one, but a very consistent problem we see from a lot of top laners in regards to teleport. To explain, let's take a look at what this Jax does after killing the enemy Urgot. Jax proceeds to crash the wave into the tower to reset and spend his hard-earned gold. As you all know, after crashing a wave, it will always bounce back towards your side of the lane. This creates a very common discussion around whether you should teleport back to lane or not, since you technically don't need to. We'll explain it in a moment, but pay attention to what happens here. Jax chooses to use it to get back to lane, so let's see if this was a good teleport or not. Once Urgot is back in lane, he abuses his range and bigger wave to slowly but surely pressure Jax off the wave and to crash the wave at the tower. Jax just kind of sits back and watches, as there's nothing he can do about this process. So, was Jax's teleport good or not? Of course not. Teleporting back when a wave is pushing into you isn't always wrong. However, there's only 2 real situations in which you would ever do it. The first is if your jungler is on the top side of the map. With the wave pushing into you, it is often worth it to teleport to keep the wave frozen so that your jungler can easily gank your lane. Gank setups like these are very common, especially as you climb higher and higher in elo. The second scenario in which you would teleport is if you are strong enough to bully your opponent 1v1, even when you're at a minion deficit. Preventing your opponent from crashing a wave in top lane is a big deal when you're winning. Think about it. Crashing a wave lets your opponent play safe for a very long time. What ends up happening is that they crash, then it slowly bounces back into them, which just lets them sit back and chill as the wave gets there. Then they can safely farm the wave at their tower. Finally, you have to be really patient and wait for the wave to leave their tower before you can ever be aggressive again. This is a long process where your opponent gets to chill and avoid fighting you. That's precisely why teleporting to prevent your opponent from crashing is very, very good when you're able to crush them in a 1v1. Back to this Jax game. This teleport did not have either of those 2 previous concepts in mind. His Diana had no top side camps available at the moment. This is a definite sign that she is not coming top anytime soon. Likewise, Jax was not strong enough to fight at such a minion deficit versus Urgot at this point. This makes his teleport completely useless. If all he could do is let the wave crash at his tower, he may as well just have walked back to lane and saved his TP. Now he feels pressured to go for a desperate all-in because he doesn't have a teleport to fall back on. Unfortunately, he gets outplayed and loses his earlier lead. So if a wave is ever pushing back into you and you've got the option of teleporting back, just keep those 2 previous concepts in mind before choosing to waste your all-important cooldown. For our final tip, we're going to cover a mistake ranged top laners make and how to fix it, but do keep in mind that you can spot this mistake even as the melee player and take advantage of it if you don't play ranged carries. Now, if we asked all of you what a ranged champion's win condition is versus a melee champion early on, what would you instinctively say? Typically, most players immediately think about harassing them early on, building CS leads, and slowly punishing your opponent out of the lane. While this is still technically the ideal win condition, it's not not as realistic as it used to be to achieve this most games anymore. In fact, many changes over the years have made this way harder to pull off and also less required in general. After much complaining from Melee players, Riot slowly made changes to how ranged versus melee matchups actually go in most lanes. Defensive options like Doran's Shield and Second Wind became very common and are ridiculously strong when paired together. Likewise, many ranged top laners' stats got changed around from being early bullies to more scaling instead. This is because ranged champions tended to be very hit or miss. They either snowballed or were totally useless. Jace is probably the best example of this. He was once known as the most frustrating lane bully in the game that felt impossible to play against early. However, Riot made constant changes like nerfing his base AD for more scaling attack damage and so on. So now he's more of a mid-game spiking champion that doesn't fall off nearly as hard as he used to. All this means is that for many ranged versus melee matchups, overly harassing during the early levels is not your primary win condition anymore. And yet this is still the playstyle almost every ranged top laner continues to default to. Like this Teemo versus Mundo for example. Yes, Teemo is quite the lane bully, but the enemy Mundo is just absorbing a ton of Teemo's harass with Doran's Shield and Second Wind. It is very difficult to push Mundo out of lane with this setup early on. If anything, Mundo can sometimes win trades by slowing the Teemo and having him tank a ton of minion aggro. It's a genuine complaint right now that you literally take more damage from minions than you deal to someone with D-Shield and Second Wind. All this means is that none of Teemo's harass is sticking. Despite this, Teemo keeps playing aggressively and is eventually ganked for it, which is how every ranged top laner throws their advantage. So, what are we saying? Well, the beauty of ranged top laners is that you still have lane control early on. It's just that your harass isn't that strong yet. Most ranged top laners now come online once they have their tier 2 boots or an item component. For example, Kennen once he has Sork boots, Jace and Quinn when they have serrated Dirk, Teemo and Nico with attack speed boots, etc. So, during the early levels, your main goal is to harass a bit, but mostly to set up a proper recall timing to get a decent spike. Once you have an item under your belt, that's when ranged top laners can begin out-vaulting the healing from Doran's Shield and Second Wind and actually being able to meaningfully harass. But during those early levels of 1 to 4 or so, you're not really that strong, and your 50 damage autos are not going to be enough to push your opponent out of lane in most matchups, so you should stop committing to such an old style of play and just adapt to the times. Anyway guys, those are some of the most common mistakes we see top laners make. They're incredibly easy to fix and will make climbing much easier. And for everything else you need to start climbing ranks fast, there's Skillcapped.com. With premium courses for every role and skill taught by the best players, Skillcapped is the perfect platform to help take your game to the next level. Our service is completely risk-free to try as you're kept safe with rank up insurance. If you don't significantly improve while actively using Skillcapped, then you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Get the rank you've always wanted by clicking the link in the description below. Alright, that's a wrap on this one guys. We here at Skillcapped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.